ago, Goodreads put out a list of the top 60 books that have been published in the last 5 years according to Goodreads users. They determined this list strictly by numbers. They tallied up all of the books that Goodreads members had marked as want to read, currently reading, or read. Then they looked at the average rating of all of those titles and compiled a list of 60 of them that have a 3.5 average rating or above. I am going to look at that list of 60 books now, talk about which ones I have read or want to read, and tell you if I think it is worth the read and if it deserves to be on this list of the most popular books from the last 5 years. Let's get into it. Goodreads has organized all of these books from number 60 all the way to the most popular book of the last 5 years, so I'm going to start at the way bottom and just go through it real time, talk about what I have read and what I think about it. So the first book that I've read on this list is actually at number 58, which is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. I have to be honest, I'm a little surprised that this is in the top 60 books of the last 5 years. I read it, I think, in the year that it was published, probably in about 2019, on the recommendation of a friend. Somebody gave me the book to read because they had really enjoyed it. I don't really remember a lot about it, but I remember it being very serious and maybe not exactly something that I could relate to at that time in my life. I think it deals a lot with childhood and motherhood, and I was neither a child nor a mother, and I also wasn't really into reading at that time, and if I was, I think I was probably gravitating towards more of the YA fantasy. I was reading probably Percy Jackson again, and this was very far outside of my comfort zone. So I personally don't remember enjoying it, but I don't think that I was a very reliable reader at the time. So I can't really say whether or not I think it's worth the read or if it deserves to be on this list, just because I don't really remember it and I probably have a skewed perspective of it now. I will say that I have never seen a single person talk about this book since I have been kind of in and around the booktube community, bookstagram, booktok. I don't see anybody talk about this book. So on that alone, maybe I don't understand why Goodreads thinks it is very popular. Moving on. There's a couple books at the bottom here that I haven't read, like Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I've heard amazing things about that book, but still haven't read it. She has a book coming out later this year that I'm really excited about called Atmosphere. That's totally unrelated, but just kind of a stream of consciousness thought. I've heard a lot about Every Summer After, but every time I picked it up at the bookstore, I'm just not really that interested in reading it. The next book on this list that I have read, though, is at number 52, and that is The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. I think that is the third and final book in the Cruel Prince trilogy. And funny enough, if the timeline works out, I probably was reading The Cruel Prince and Such a Fun Age around the same time, and I really didn't want to be reading Such a Fun Age. I probably wanted to be reading The Cruel Prince because that is kind of the YA fantasy. Some people call The Cruel Prince romantasy. I don't think it is. Romance is a very subplot in that book, and honestly, it's not even a very exciting fantasy book. It's very political, which I actually super enjoyed. So I really like The Cruel Prince, and I think that it does deserve to be on this list. I think that it is right to be popular. Ooh, there's a Lucy Foley book here at number 50. We all know how I feel about Lucy Foley. I haven't read The Paris Apartment, but I don't think that I will. I just can't. I can't do another Lucy Foley book right now. But at number 49 is Divine Rivals. I really enjoyed the first book in the Divine Rivals duology. I thought it was so sweet. It's a beautiful romance. It kind of feels like a fantastical You've Got Mail situation with a lot of letter writing. They don't really know who the other person is that they're writing a letter to and falling in love with. I thought it was so beautifully written. I thought the world was really cool. That is a great book to me. However, the second book, which I'm scared is on this list, maybe higher up, I sure hope not. That book was one of the most disappointing books that I have ever read. Because I liked Divine Rivals so much, Ruthless Vows was one of the biggest letdowns of 2024 for me, so we'll see if that's on this list. The next book that I read is sitting at number 45, and that is Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. I've talked about this one a ton. I love Andy Weir, and I loved Project Hail Mary. I think it is such a funny book. It's such a lighthearted book with actually a really intense subject matter of like somebody trying to save the literal earth, but it was such a fun reading experience. It's very intricate and detailed when it comes to the science of space travel and everything that happens in space, so there were a lot of things that were going over my head head, but I was just kind of reading it and being like, wow, you have to be really smart to get all of this digested in your brain, which maybe I wasn't, but I was able to just kind of take a step back, enjoy it for the characters, enjoy it for the story, and I think it is such a great book. Highly recommend reading Project Hail Mary. And also, if you haven't read The Martian, which was Andy Weir's first book that he published, that one is also an amazing book. I definitely think that Project Hail Mary deserves to be on this list, and it is 100% worth the read. Ooh, I see The Housemaid's Secret at number 44 is next. I haven't read that one, but I think that's probably the second book by Frida McFadden in the Housemaid series. And I did recently read The Housemaid, which is the first book. That book is absolutely bonkers crazy. I don't think I liked it, but I respect it. I'm not totally surprised to see that another book in that trilogy is on this list. Oh, number 42 is The Wicked King. Is that the third book? Oh no, yeah. The Wicked King is book 2 in the Cruel Prince trilogy. So book 2 is rated higher than book 3 on this list, sitting at number 42. I have read it. I remember liking it. I don't think I remember the series enough to compare book 3 and book 2 closely enough to decide which one is better or worse, but I think that that trilogy as a whole is definitely worth the read if you are into the political side of fantasy, you want a little bit of a enemies to lovers romance. I think it's a fun time. It's a cool world. I've seen a lot of Kristen Hanna on this list so far. The Women and the Four Winds is on here. I have to imagine we're going to see The Nightingale and maybe a couple more titles from her. I have just started The Nightingale. I'm literally like 10 pages in, but I haven't read anything else by her. So I'm excited to kind of start delving into her as an author and learning more about her works. But I know that she is very highly regarded and I'm sure deserves to be on this list. Number 38 is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, which is one that I just read a couple weeks ago for the first time. That book was totally wild. The twisty drama was insane. That book really made me question my own morals because the main character that you're following, her first person POV, she does something objectively morally wrong, but is so maybe narcissistic and arrogant and caught up in herself that she is able to convince herself that it actually wasn't that bad what she did. And it was written in a way where me as the reader, I would find myself being like, yeah, it's not that bad. That's not that bad. She's not hurting anybody. But if you look at it on paper, it's a horrible thing that she did and it is wrong. But I loved the way that R.F. Kuang made you empathize with this character, made you feel compassion for this character, but in a frustrating way because I don't want to feel that way. I'm starting to like her, I'm starting to believe her, but I know that she is a bad guy in this instance. And that was such an interesting reading experience. That book was wild. I highly recommend people read that if they want a little bit of twisty drama in their life. It's just such an interesting premise and such an interesting read. I know that people love it. I think that it is absolutely worth the read and it definitely deserves to be on this list. I think it actually deserves to be higher on this list in my opinion. And then at number 37 is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This book was actually my first 5-star read of 2024. I absolutely love it. It is such a cozy read. It feels like a warm hug. It's very feel good, lighthearted, and I enjoyed it so much. It also had a lot of pretty deep emotional beats in it as well. The thing that I love about it the most is that we follow 3 different characters in 3 different POVs, and one of them is an octopus. His name is Marcellus, and he is kind of the narrator of the book, and he tells the story of these other 2 characters from his perspective of being in an octopus tank at an aquarium, and that was so unique, and he was funny. His little chapter insertions were so funny. I was laughing out loud. He's also the only POV that's in first person perspective, where the other 2 characters that you're following are in third person. So it's the only time that you really feel like you're talking to somebody else as a reader and you're like inside somebody else's head. And it was just so interesting. Such a fun way to read a book. Highly recommend that one, and it definitely deserves to be on this list. Again, I think it might deserve to be a little bit higher in my opinion. The Perfect Marriage I currently have on my shelf. I've never read it. I've heard a ton about the Spanish love deception. That is not really one that I'm super interested in reading. This is interesting because The Maid is number 34 on here. Not to be confused with The Housemaid, because I know a lot of people do get those kind of confused. I have heard of a couple people that I know reading The Maid and saying that it was the worst book that they read in 2024. So bad across the board. And these are people that I trust their opinion on the books that they're reading. And it immediately, in my mind, has made me decide that I will never read The Maid. Not even out of curiosity. I just don't really care. I've heard people destroy this book. So I'm super curious now that it is about middle of the pack as far as the most popular books go in the last 5 years. Super interesting. Don't have anything else to really say about it. Moving up, at number 32, we have The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, which is a prequel to the Hunger Games series. Let me just go on a rant real quick. I'm so sorry to have to subject you to this, but I have said this before anytime somebody asks me if I'm gonna see the movie or read the book, and I just have to get this out here. For me, growing up, the books that I always gravitated towards was that classic good versus evil experience. Harry Potter and Voldemort, Percy Jackson and Kronos, the Fellowship and literally everybody else versus Sauron, the White Witch and Aslan. Like, I just gravitated towards those true good versus true evil books as a child, and it definitely has shaped who I am as a reader today, and even just consuming media at all, watching movies, reading books, whatever that looks like. I love those good versus evil plot lines, but it has become very normal to have a morally gray villain, and sometimes I am all for that. I love a good morally gray, complex character written with a tragic backstory that informs their decisions. I think that's great. However, there are some villains, in my opinion, that should not be touched. Don't give me a backstory on them. And one of those villains is President Snow from the Hunger Games. He is true evil. He is the living worst. I don't want to have compassion for him. I don't want to have empathy for him. I don't want to learn his backstory so that I feel tormented the next time that I watch the Hunger Games movies or maybe reread the Hunger Games book, and I have more compassion for Snow as he makes these decisions, and I'm reading and like, oh, well, you don't know what he's been through. He's been through so much. I don't care what he's been through. He's a bad guy. Don't try to manipulate my emotions to liking him. I feel the same way about Mufasa, the movie that has recently come out where you get a backstory to Scar, one of the most evil Disney villains of all time. Don't do that, please. That's my rant. Totally a personal opinion. I'm not saying that it is the right opinion, but that is how I feel. And that is the reason why I never read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and probably never will, and probably will never see the movie. Another book that I will probably never read is Icebreaker. I don't want to. Sitting at number 30 is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I have read this book. This was a book that I picked up because everybody told me to read it in order to get over the ACOTAR hangover that you feel when you finish that series. And they're like, well, the next book that you should read is From Blood and Ash because they're really similar and it's really good. I read the first book and it was okay. It was fine. I didn't love it. There were some things that I liked about it, but mostly it just felt not great. And then I read about 50% of book 2 and I DNF'd it because I despised the way that the story was going. I ended up looking up some things that happened in the end of the series because honestly, when I'm feeling that torn and that much dislike for a book series, I have to spoil it for myself. I have to know what happens at the end of it. And if that ends up being a good ending or a bad ending, it will determine whether I continue on with the book. And I decided not to continue on with the book or the series. I just don't think it's very good. I don't think the story is good. And I think it's just way too spicy in my opinion. It just felt so strange and awful to read. So that one I don't think deserves to be on this list. I know it got really popular, but I think it got popular for the wrong reasons. I don't think it's worth a read. I don't think it should be on this list, let alone at number 30. Next up at number 25 is Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. This is kind of her third series that she's written. She started with Throne of Glass, moved into ACOTAR, and then Crescent Cities is that third world that she's built. I read Crescent City after I had finished ACOTAR as well, or the first 3 books in ACOTAR. Then I read Crescent City. It was really tough for me to get into. It's very dense. There's so much world building. It's a very complicated world that she has made. And I liked it the first time that I read it, didn't love it. And then like 2 years later, I decided to reread Crescent City. And I think because I had the foundation of the world underneath my belt already, I could kind of ignore all of those details and focus on the plot and the characters a lot more. And I ended up loving the book the second time. It made me cry. It had so many emotional elements to it. It was a very exciting story. And I really enjoyed it the second time. And I think that does come down to just a personal preference thing. I'm not recommending that if you read Crescent City and you didn't like it the first time that you should read it again and you'll love it. I think you know yourself best as a reader, whatever you enjoy or whatever you don't enjoy. For me, it worked out to reread it and I really enjoyed it. I think just with how popular Sarah J. Maas is, with how much people love her books and buy her books, it makes sense that it's on this list. I personally don't think this is worth a read unless you are a pre-existing Sarah J. Maas fan and have read other books. If you have never read any books by SJM, don't start with Crescent City, whatever you do. And if you don't really like fantasy, you don't really like romantasy, then just keep moving. Move on from this because you won't enjoy it. But if you already really like SJM and those types of books, I do think it's worth the read. You just have to kind of get through the world building and know that your brain power is required a little bit more, at least for the beginning of this book. Yes, sitting at number 23, Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. This is book 2 in the Empyrean series. Book 1 was Fourth Wing. Iron Flame I have discussed on here many times. I probably am not going to spend a lot of time discussing it now. I think it's an okay book. I think it's a huge step down from Fourth Wing. I know Fourth Wing has its problems, but I super enjoyed it. It was very fun, just kind of like a popcorn book, bingeable, easy to read, dragons, fun time. Iron Flame was a hot mess, and I think I'll leave it there. Does it deserve to be on this list? Numerically, I would say yes, because it was one of the best-selling books of its time, for sure. So yes, it deserves to be on the list, but if we were judging it by quality of books, which we're not, this is just numbers based, but if it was judged quality-wise, no, it does not deserve to be on this list for sure. At number 22 is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I don't really read a lot of nonfiction, but this is a nonfiction book that has been on my radar. I'm interested in it, but only if I'm really, really in the mood for a nonfiction book. At number 21 is Happy Place. I definitely think this deserves to be on here. This is my favorite Emily Henry book. It doesn't really even feel like a romance book, and Emily Henry is known for writing those classic romance books. This feels more like a character study of a group of friends, people that go through tragic events, traumatic events, and how they kind of get out of it and learn to love each other. And it's all sort of wrapped up in this beautiful lake town, beach town vibe in Maine, and I just love the setting. I love the characters. I think the story is so beautiful. I think it's a great book, and it's definitely worth the read, and it definitely deserves to be on this list. At number 18, there's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I loved this book as well. It follows a group of friends that meet in school and decide to create a video game together in the early 90s, and it kind of follows their relationship and their profession and their career creating video games over, I think, like 30 years. And it follows the highs and the lows of success and money and creativity, and I think that it was really, really well done. Gabrielle Zevin is such a good writer. She's just amazing, and I really, really appreciated what she was able to do in this book. I would look at some trigger warnings or content warnings for some things before going into it, but overall, I think this is a great read. I'm actually really pleased to see that it is on this list because I think that everybody should read it. It's such a great book. At number 16 is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. So that is our second Sarah J. Maas book that is on this list. I actually kind of maybe would have expected more, but maybe they weren't published within the correct time period for what they're doing. So this is the 4th book in ACOTAR. Technically maybe the 5th published book because there was a novella that came out before it, but the 4th like full-length novel in this book, it follows a different side character. And I did really enjoy this book. I didn't enjoy it as much as the previous trilogy by any means, just because I don't love the character as much that we're following. I don't love the romance as much that we're following. There is way more spice in it, and so I was just like flipping through pages as quickly as I can towards the end. However, the ending of this book is incredible. It's so good. It's one of my favorite scenes in all of the ACOTAR books, even all of the Sarah J. Maas books that I've read. It is one of my favorite scenes. It really focuses and hones in on female friendship and growing out of tragedy and learning how to deal with grief and traumatic events. And the ending is so epic, in my opinion. I absolutely love it. I just think the first like 500 pages needed to be cut down and shortened a lot. And I wished that they would have focused more on those female friendships that end up being developed instead of the romance. And I do like the romance. I love what happens with it. I just wished that there was more depth to the book, specifically with where we landed at the end. But it's good. I think it's worth the read. Again, only if you are a pre-existing fan and have read her other books. Don't just jump in with this book because you won't like it. We've got another Emily Henry book on here with Book Lovers. Book Lovers definitely isn't my favorite of hers. I think it's near-ish the bottom of my list, but it's good. It's a sweet read. I think maybe it has a place on this list, but in my opinion, it does not deserve to be at number 15. I think it should be a lot lower if it is going to be on this list, especially when you think of all of the other Emily Henry books that exist. I don't think this one is her best work. It's still enjoyable for sure, but it's just not my favorite. At number 12, we have The Housemaid, which is the one that I talked about a while ago because I think the second book is on here. The Housemaid's Secrets, maybe. The Housemaid, I have already discussed. It's a crazy book. I didn't like it. Frida McFadden has a scary brain. Something's going on in her brain that is nefarious, but I respect it because she had me hooked the whole time and I had to read it as quickly as I possibly could to figure out the ending. So maybe she won in the end. And at number 11 is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is definitely an Emily Henry book that deserves to be near the top here. I think Happy Place is my favorite and I think it's the most unique book that she's written, but Beach Read, just from a classic romance perspective, I think that it's amazing. It probably is the first like true romance book that I ever read, and it sort of kickstarted me into the genre and made me realize that there was a lot more to romance than I was assuming there was. But I read Beach Read because of a book of the month pick and I was like, oh, this is a romance book. I could read this genre. Like, this is a great genre. So I have a soft spot for Beach Read for sure, and I think that it deserves to be on this list. It's definitely up there as far as Emily Henry goes. Now, before I get to the top 10, I think I'm gonna try to guess what is up there. I have to say Fourth Wing for sure. Would maybe House of Sky and Breath be on here, the second Crescent City one? I think it could be, just because of how popular it got on TikTok and Instagram because of the ending. So I'm gonna say Fourth Wing, House of Sky and Breath. I'm gonna say The Silent Patient. I think that that is one of the most like popular TikTok mystery thrillers. I read it last year and I really enjoyed it, so I bet that that's up there somewhere. I think maybe Daisy Jones and the Six is probably up there as well. I know that one got super popular. I haven't read it. I do want to read it. It's definitely on my TBR, but I know that people read that like crazy, so I think that one's probably up there. Probably Song of Achilles too. I haven't read that one, but I did read Circe by the same author, and I really liked Circe. My husband read Song of Achilles last year and he really enjoyed it, so it's on my shelf right now and I know I need to read it. Haven't read it yet, but I think that one's probably up there. I haven't read any Colleen Hoover and I don't know the publishing timeline, but probably a Colleen Hoover book. All right, let's just reveal. And our top 10 is, oh, at number 10 is People We Meet on Vacation. That's my least favorite Emily Henry book. I don't think it's very good at all. I can't believe that that is top 10. That's wild to me. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I haven't read that before, but I've heard a lot of good things. I honestly don't know anything about it or what to expect. Oh, The Guest List by Lucy Foley is on here. I have read that. I really disliked The Guest List. I've talked about it a couple times on this channel. I don't think that it's very good. I don't think it's a good mystery. The ending is not good. Lucy Foley is a very infuriating writer, and I just had a bad time reading the book. So that's crazy that that is up here. There is a Colleen Hoover one on here called It Starts With Us. Don't know what that is. The Love Hypothesis by Allie Hazelwood. I have read that one as well. That was a long time ago. I think I read it the year that it was published. So I don't remember a ton about it. I don't remember loving it, but I also think that I liked it. Number 5 is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I can't believe that I didn't think of that one to put on there. That's so great. I love The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I definitely think that it deserves to be in that spot and up at the top for sure. If you are interested in urban fantasy or magical realism, a really strong female main character, and just kind of a super twisty time, I think that that one is a great one for you to read. Daisy Jones and the Six is at number 4. Fourth Wing is at number 3. This one's very surprising to me. In the second spot is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I loved that book. That was a 5-star read for me last year. I didn't think it was popular enough or well liked enough to be at the number 2 spot though. That's crazy. And number 1 is The Silent Patient. I definitely could have told you that The Silent Patient was in the top 10. I gotta say, I'm pretty surprised that it's number 1 though. I'm definitely not mad about it. I'm just surprised. So out of the top 60 books that Goodreads has determined in the last 5 years, I have read 23 of them, which is a pretty strong number. I actually don't think that I was expecting to read that many of them, probably because I have no concept of time and what has been published in the last 5 years or when I actually read some of these books. Some of them I agree with, some of them I disagree, but would love to know your thoughts in the comments. How many have you read off of this list? And are there any books that aren't on this list that you think deserve to be on it? This was really fun and kind of enlightening to go through this list with you all. But as always, thank you so much for joining, watching, and hanging out with me on this corner of the internet, and we will see you next time.